Welcome to the Sheltazar Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Eisen. I am a spiritual life coach, channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. The Sheltazar Podcast is all about integrating spiritual wisdom into your life in a practical way. And my guest today on the Jeffrey Eisen Podcast is Julie Ryan from Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Hi. How are things in Birmingham, Alabama?
Sweet home, baby. Sweet home, Alabama. They're wonderful, sunny, beautiful in the 60 degrees and lovely. A little chilly this morning on my morning walk, but it's warmed up nicely. So I'll send some sunshine your way.
I would greatly appreciate it because your 60 would be very welcome here in Toronto.
How cold is it there?
Well, we're in Celsius, so it's hovering around zero. So that would be around 32, I guess. So yeah, a little chilly for us.
Yeah. Well, but it's pretty normal for this time of year, isn't it, for you?
Yeah, anything that's normal is greatly accepted at this time in history because there's a lot of abnormal. Why don't you start by introducing yourself to the listeners, telling them a bit about yourself and how you got into the amazing work that you do?
Well, I, Jeffrey, am an entrepreneur and an inventor. I've invented surgical devices that are sold throughout the world, and I've founded 9 companies in 5 industries in the last 30 plus years. So I'm a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness, which means I'm a medical intuitive and psychic. So I can scan people energetically, help facilitate energetic healings. We can talk to your dead grandma. I can communicate with your pet. We can do past life stuff. We can talk to spirit guides, angels. I can tell how close to death someone is. I can communicate telepathically with that person if they're unable to communicate. So that's what I'm doing now in my entrepreneurial journey. I'm working as a medical intuitive and psychic with people all around the world. And I teach classes and I have a show. It's keeping me very busy and it's really fun.
It sounds amazing. Of course, I'm curious as to how you went from entrepreneur extraordinaire to, as you describe it, the woo-woo world.
Well, I had a friend who gave me a book by a woman named Carolyn Mace, who calls herself a medical intuitive, about 30 years ago, actually. And I thought, what the heck is a medical intuitive? I was in the medical supply business throughout my career, and I'd never heard that term before, but I certainly was interested in helping people heal through inventing and manufacturing devices that helped in surgery, primarily after the first couple of years right out of school. So I read her book. It's called Anatomy of the Spirit. Carolyn Mace's book is Anatomy of the Spirit. And I wanted to know more. And back then we didn't have the internet yet, which is hard to imagine a time before we had the internet. And I did the old fashioned thing, Jeffrey. I went to a bookstore to see what else I could find. And I found a book called Hands of Light by a PhD named Barbara Brennan, who's a former NASA physicist. And she talked about how utilizing energy can help facilitate healing. And so I learned what I could from her book and I wanted to know more. So I called her school. She had a school at the time and found out that there was someone in my area that was teaching this. And so I studied for 6 years a curriculum, paid the equivalent of what I would have paid to get a PhD or an MD, and then just did it. And I didn't know why. I was just interested in it. And then fast forward to today, I sold my surgical device manufacturing company several years ago and was led to release my book, Angelic Attendants, and then it's just all kind of snowballed from there. Mm-hmm. And now I teach people around the world what I do, but instead of 6 years and costing a fortune, it's condensed into 4 Saturdays in a row, 8 hours, and they can all do what I do. So
fabulous.
People say to me, well, how does that work? And I say, well, we used to use carrier pigeons to communicate with one another across vast distances, and now we use the internet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned Carolyn Mace's Anatomy of the Spirit. I just used that chapter this week in one of my coaching sessions. It's my go-to when someone seems to be getting a bit of a chakra issue. I always like to refer to what she says about that particular chakra. This one was a person that was having some solar plexus third chakra issue. So it's a great book, and I've heard her when I began my journey. I did a workshop with her, and she's a great inspiration and obviously inspired you to go on to become a medical intuitive. So I'd like to chat with you first about the medical intuitive part about what you do, and tell the listeners a bit about what that is and how you do what you do.
Well, I'm a human MRI, basically. I've had people say, you're like a human MRI, and I really am. I connect with people energetically anywhere in the world and even outside of the world. If you were on Mars, Jeffrey, I could connect to you. It doesn't matter. So I raise my vibrational level to the level of spirit, because we're all spirits attached to a body having a human experience. And when we're attached to a body, we vibrate more slowly. So I raise my vibrational level. I watch a laser beam come from my body here in Birmingham, Alabama, and it'll hook into you like you're in Toronto. So it would hook into you in Toronto. And then I envision a hologram of you in my mind's eye, and I shoot energy from your feet up through the top of your head, and it's as if I'm looking in an X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI. And three things happen. Number one, something's identified. Immediately thereafter, there will be some type of energetic healing that will begin, and it can take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures all the time that emulate what I saw in operating rooms for all those years when I was developing new products and testing prototypes and such. And then sometimes I'll see methodologies and devices used for healings that haven't been invented yet in our human world. And that's fun, because that appeals to my inventor brain when that happens. And so I facilitate healing. It's spirit working through me and with me to facilitate healing. And then the third thing I do is I'm looking at the person's energy field membrane. And that's the container, Jeffrey, that holds the energy that makes up our body and our spirit. And it reminds me of really thin, stretchy saran wrap, the kind that you'd see on a tray of chicken breasts from the grocery store. You know how that stuff's thinner and stretchier than perhaps the box of saran wrap or plastic wrap in our kitchen drawers. And when there's a tear or a hole in that, what has happened is it's causing an energy leak. Energy leaks are caused by some emotional event, which in turn has caused an energy block, a la Eastern medicine, acupressure, acupuncture, clear the block, get the chi to move, that concept. And so I go into that tear or hole and I'm shown a scene. Maybe something that was simple, like somebody called you a bad name when you were little and it hurt your feelings, or it may be something that's dramatic, regardless of what it is, regardless even if you remember it. If it's a past life event, most likely you won't remember it, but we'll get what the year was, where it was, a little bit about what happened. And as soon as we illuminate it, Jeffrey, it clears that energy block and allows the energy field membrane to heal, which helps the body heal and helps the body maintain health. So a quick analogy that I use for this concept is, imagine if you go to the pet store and buy a goldfish. They're going to put it in a plastic bag of water in order for you to get it home. So if you have a picture of that in your mind's eye, the goldfish represents our body. The water represents our spirit, because the body is inside the spirit. And the plastic bag represents our energy field membrane. So if there's a pinhole in that plastic bag and water's draining out a drop at a time for a long time, that fish is going to be fine. But when enough water drains out, that fish is going to be in trouble. And that's what happens to the human body. So we fix it. The body has a tremendous capacity to heal, and the person's usually able to heal their body, and it helps maintain health.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Thanks for explaining all of that. I'm fascinated with the death part, because that's come up a little bit for me in the last week or so. And I'm getting ready to channel something from Shaltazar, because I would love a greater understanding of death. So maybe you can help me by inspiring me to connect to that wisdom. Tell me about death. I had a client today that told me that that was his greatest fear, was around death. And a lot of people are afraid of death. Tell me a bit about how you got into that and what you do with regard to teaching people about death.
Well, how I got into it was when my own mother was dying, I started seeing this configuration of angels and deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets surrounding her. And at first I thought, oh my gosh, am I hallucinating or what am I actually seeing? And then come to find out it's a system that everybody goes through. It's a series of events rather that everybody goes through. And I call it the 12 phases of transition. And in the spirit world, Jeffrey, you know this, there's no time as we understand it in our human frame of mind. And time 100 years of 100 lifetimes can be not even maybe a blip on the radar screen in this spirit world. And so everybody goes through the 12 phases of transition, whether they go through it instantly, like in the case of a homicide or suicide, or whether they go through it and their death is prolonged, perhaps over days, weeks, months, even years. There's a gal that called into my show for 2 years whose father was dying of Alzheimer's, and he was in phase 11 of 12 for 2 years.
Wow.
And so as a person approaches death, the configuration of the angels and deceased loved ones evolves from a circle around the patient, the person who's dying, into a horseshoe, and then eventually into a straight line at the foot of the bed, for instance, if they're in a bed. And we can tell how close to death somebody is based on what phase of transition he's in. Now, illustrations of these phases are on my website, AskJulieRyan.com, and certainly that's what my book, Angelic Attendants, is all about. And it's fascinating how we can tune in with somebody, and this is part of what I teach anywhere in the world. I did this right before I came on with you. I have a friend who has a loved one who's dying in Las Vegas, and she texted me and she said, what phase is he in? Well, he's in phase 11. He's ready to go. He's getting very, very, very close. And it's very helpful because most families will want to be with their loved one as they're dying. And oftentimes people will travel long ways. They'll get on a plane, or in this case, her daughter traveled for 2 days straight by car. She was afraid to fly because of the COVID. So people take time off work. They're rearranging their schedules. They're having to come up with childcare. And it's convenient, number one, to know how close to death somebody is. And furthermore, when we're able to communicate with the patient as they're dying, even if they're not able to communicate with their family members and their loved ones who are there with them, we can find out some valuable information that can be helpful to the family. May I give you a quick story of one of my favorite
Thank you.
examples? I was working with a woman in another state, and her father, they took off the ventilator and they thought he would pass quickly. And I always ask the person who's dying, are you ready to go? Are you in pain? What do you need? So this elderly gentleman who was a retired dentist kept telling me, I need my family to file my quarterly estimated taxes. His daughter, who was working with me, kept saying, oh, for heaven's sakes, that's just crazy. Don't worry about your taxes. We'll take care of all that. You just do what you need to do. So this went on for 2 weeks. And then finally, one day, after a couple of weeks, they expected this gentleman to die very quickly once they took him off the ventilator, and he's just hanging on. So she said to me, I just don't know what he needs. And so we asked him again. I have spiritual conference calls a lot where I'll have the person who's on the phone, and then we're talking to another person's spirit, whether they're deceased or still attached to a body. So I said, he still wants you to file his quarterly estimated taxes. And she said, I don't even know where they are. So I asked her dad, and he said, they're in my desk in my bedroom, something like middle drawer on the left. So I said to her, just go to his house and look in the drawer and see if they're there. So sure enough, she did. And they were all filled out, and there was a stamp on the envelope, and everything was all ready. And she dropped it in the mailbox, and she came home, and he died shortly thereafter.
Wow.
Like within a matter of maybe an hour or two. Well, come to find out, she was the executor of his estate, Jeffrey. Come to find out, by the taxes being postmarked with the date that he died, it saved her all kinds of headaches when she was trying to settle his estate.
Wow.
So funeral directors are full of stories like that. We all decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us when we go, all of that. So that's one of my favorite fun stories about somebody who was dying.
How did you come up with the 12 stages of death?
12 phases of transition.
Oh, pardon me.
Is the official name.
Yes.
That's all right. Yes. Just because I saw it for the first time with my mother, and then I saw it with many families over the years with whom I had worked. And I was mapping out, okay, everybody goes through these different phases. And then I got, okay, here are the different phases and here's what's happening in these configurations. I was able to assemble that off of my notes from working with several people who had a loved one who was dying. And then to release my book, that's another fun story. May I share that with you?
Please do.
I was at my mentor's one day when she was doing a healing on me. I do healings on people all over the world. She's the only one that zaps on me. And I was there. And whenever she's doing an energetic healing on me, my deceased loved ones come in and they are on either side of me. I'm laying face up on a massage table while she's doing an energetic healing on me. So one day, this dead Pope showed up. This dead Pope spirit. And he had his whole Pope outfit on, the hat and the shoes and the whole 9 yards. And I said to him, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, I never heard of a Pope Clement. And he chuckled and he said, well, I was number 6. And I said, okay, fine. Can I help you? I'm like, why are you here? And he said, you're supposed to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And all this business experience and all this other experience that you've had in your lifetime has prepared you for this. And so you just need to get on with it. You need to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And I said to him, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman and people are going to think I'm nuts. And he laughed and he said, yeah, whatever. Well, Jeffrey, when I was leaving, I got in the car and I Googled on my phone just for kicks, Pope Clement VI. Well, come to find out, he was in office during the Black Plague that killed 2/3 of Europe.
Wow.
And he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought to myself, girl, you can't make this stuff up, because I had never heard of a Pope Clement. So that's how that all got started. And then he prodded me for years before I had enough courage to release the book and release the stories in the book about what had happened. And what's really transpired now, which is fun, is it's being used as a gift for people who have a loved one who's dying or who have just lost a loved one. And people give it to somebody who can utilize the information. They find it very comforting. Furthermore, it's being used in Sunday school classes all over America, in churches of all denominations and in synagogues. So I will often get an email from somebody at a church and they'll say, our Bible study group or our book club wants to read your book. Can we get a discount on a big number of them? And my church actually gives a copy to everybody who comes in to plan a funeral. Mm-hmm. So I didn't see that coming, but it's been fun watching it all unfold.
Well, I certainly encourage the listeners to go out and buy the book, but what kind of advice would you give? We're in the, in the midst, or hopefully near the end of this COVID pandemic, where there has been a lot of transitioning. So for anyone that is afraid of the tragic results of COVID, getting, being that percentage of people that transition because of it, what advice would you give to someone who is really afraid of death? And I will use the word death because that tends to be what their fear is, the word death, not transition.
Right. Go on my website, AskJulieRyan.com, and look at the 12 phases of transition, and you'll see a configuration of angels and deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets that are there. And everybody goes through that. And it's really a glorious component that's there. Our deceased loved ones are there to welcome us to non-physical, also known as heaven to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. It takes the fear out of a lot of it. I also, people who are very fearful, will do an exercise with them that I call the walk to heaven. And it's a dress rehearsal. And I talk about it in my book as well. It's a dress rehearsal of what's going to happen when their spirit separates from their body, and that there's really nothing to fear. It's a glorious situation. It's a glorious adventure. And I think that's why Pope Clement, he is my main spirit guide at this point in my life and really pushed me to release this information. Interestingly enough, Buffalo, New York's not too far from you. And there's a physician who's also a PhD there named Chris Kerr, who has written a book called Death is But a Dream. And it is based on 1,400 patients that he did university-based research on. And they, close to 90% of them, Jeffrey, have reported that they see either in visions or dreams the spirits of their deceased loved ones and or pets as they're approaching death. So it corroborates everything that I talk about from the spiritual perspective. His is very university-based research. Here's the data. Here's what we have from a medical and a research perspective. So when people understand that that's happening, and now I was teasing Dr. Kerr when I talked to him, I said, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo. And he laughed. But it gives those people that really need some kind of extra validation or extra proof, it gives them a sense of comfort.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've also written a book for kids. How did you decide or were guided to share your teachings with the younger generation?
Again, I was inspired. I've written 2 books for kids. One's called Angel Messages for Kids, and the other one's called Angel Messages for Dogs that we just released right before Christmas, right before the holidays of 2020. And how that came about, Jeffrey, is I've had lots of mothers over the years ask me to come up with a way that they can help teach their children about spirit and how we're all spirits attached to a body. And the 3 main requests were, can you help me teach my child and help my child understand why he can communicate with my deceased granddad who's been dead for 40 years. And he knows things about him that I didn't even know. And we've got to check with my mom. And they end up being right. And he says grandpa comes to visit him in his room and this child can communicate and see this deceased loved one. The other request is, can you please help me explain to my child how they know things about past lives? And they can come up with dates and times and places and names, and we can corroborate the information with online historical documents. And the mom will say, this child can't even read yet. So there's no way they would even have any concept of there maybe being another country or being a soldier in a battle. And they'll tell exactly when it was and who their commander was and what the date was and all of that. And they can corroborate the information. And then the third thing is, can you please help me teach my child and talk about when a loved one dies and we're at the funeral home and we're saying to little Johnny, well, grandma's in heaven now. And you say, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box over there. Mm-hmm. And help them understand that and understand that they can communicate with spirit, whether it be a pet that's passed or whether it be a loved one who's passed. And little children, we all come in with the ability. And then by about the age of 7 or so, we've had so many adults in our lives, normally either parents or teachers or someone else who's an authority figure, say, oh, honey, that's just your imagination. That's not real. And so we learn to shut it down. So it's an ability that everybody has. It's just a matter of waking it up and really learning how to utilize it and learning how to enhance it. And that's what I teach to people all over.
Fabulous. Well, congratulations for the amazing work that you do. I think it's really great. We're just about out of time. Maybe I could get you to tell people how they can get in touch with you, your books. All of that information will be in the description of the podcast, but maybe if you could just say it out to our listeners right now, that would be great.
Sure. It's askjulieryan.com. Everything's at askjulieryan.com. And I work with individuals all day, every day for individual consults. And then I have a show every Thursday night that's a live radio show that people call in from all over the world and ask Julie Ryan questions about anything. And then all my social media is at Ask Julie Ryan. YouTube's Ask Julie Ryan, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, all that jazz. Everything's at Ask Julie Ryan. And we're on Alexa as well with the show.
Right. So you are available to answer people's questions at Ask Julie Ryan.
That's right.
Fabulous. Great.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. I appreciate it. And again, I congratulate you for the work you're doing and keep up the great work because we need people like you helping us in these difficult and challenging times. Once again, my name is Jeffrey Eisen.
Thanks.
I'm a spiritual life coach, channeler of Sheltazar, and an energy intuitive. My guest has been Julie Ryan, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, love and light to you all.